My first full-scale conflict, it was horrible beyond words. What can I say that's not just about how awful this is?
What is the responsibility that comes with that?
The responsibilities of documenting someone else's life, especially in a delicate moment or, God forbid, a dangerous or a tragic one, are humongous. Treating documentation of world events and distributing information as a business has been absolutely cancerous to our field. I work in spaces where people are suffering. Hopefully, through the process of making these images, that makes the people that I'm photographing and working with feel seen.
Educate me about the photojournalist process of dealing with ethics.
If you're going into a war zone to make a portfolio picture, I kind of want to say two things.
Welcome to the Mood Podcast, uncovering the art of conversation, one frame at a time. I'm your host, Matt Jacob, and thanks a lot for joining me in today's conversation. Our guest this week is Natalie Keyssar, a Brooklyn-based documentary photographer whose work really explores the personal effects of political turmoil, conflict, and migration. With a background in painting and illustration, Natalie's unique perspective has led her to cover some of the most pressing global issues of our time, from Venezuela to Ukraine and beyond. Her award-winning photography has been featured in prestigious outlets like the New York Times Magazine, National Geographic, and Time. In my conversation with her, we really jump into her creative journey from her early influences, but pivot more into photojournalism to her profound focus on empathy, resilience, and the human condition. We discuss the moral imperatives of photojournalism, navigating the complexities of identity and the role of nuance in storytelling today. Natalie also shares insights into how she balances the emotional toll of her work with her passion for creating meaningful and impactful images. So now, I bring you Natalie Keyssar. Natalie Keyssar, welcome to the Mood Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me from the other side of the world.
Thank you for having me and for waking up early while I'm working what is late for me because I'm a morning person.
How are you?
Yeah,
Well,
these conversations are always wild to me because you're like time traveling. Like it's a really different headspace to be in the morning than at the night. So it's always interesting to like mix those two things.
different days. Yeah. Natalie, I wanted to start with more of an esoteric question, and there's so much to talk about, and we'll dive into everything hopefully as chronologically as possible. But I wanted to start with the word empathy, and I know empathy kind of is exuded through a lot of photographers' work, and I feel that so much with you, your work, how you speak, how you write. What does empathy mean to you, though, in photography?
Thank you for. I appreciate that you feel like the work is showing empathy. So that's a good start. I think the word empathy gets thrown. It's like I feel like almost all of the terminology in photography and ethics right now is getting thrown around a lot, and it's important that we're valuing it because a lot of the values that traditionally accompany photojournalism really need to change like desperately and quickly, and I think they are. But to me, empathy, it's really about the distinction between like empathy and sympathy, right? It's an equalizing. It's a respect for the other person's experience. I think, I work in spaces where people are suffering very often, and I'm hoping to respect that experience and try to understand that emotion, not to look down on it, not to have that natural impulse that all humans have when something happens to someone else. We are sorry that it's happening, but there's also that little tiny voice inside of you that's glad it's not you, and it's human, right? Like it's like a natural animal instinct, but I think it's like almost like learning to override that and actually really try to get as close as possible to what other people are feeling and let them teach you. And for me, that's honestly the thing that I care about the most in photography is that I learn. I'm not really that confident that I can teach anyone anything with my pictures. I think that's would be sort of arrogant, honestly, to like think that I can really like change anyone else with my pictures. I wish I felt that way. I wanted to feel that way when I got into this, but I don't. But what I do want is to be changed through the process of making them. And so for me, like learning and creating bonds with people that are close enough that I can really, truly care and feel about what they're feeling, and hoping that's somehow reflected in the image is like the best I can do.
But that does spill over into the desire for change, awareness, the frustrations of why people may not have empathy, or maybe our drive to understand why should people care about maybe something that's happening the other side of the world. Whereas, a lot of people in your country, in my home country, in many parts of the world just care about putting food on the table and surviving the next day. So, it's a lot of photography for ourselves is a self-interest pursuit, right? But certainly in your genre, photojournalism, conflict photography, there must be this overspilling desire to, shout at the world, look at what's happening, and I want to be able to help you see. Is that accurate perception?
I certainly felt that way when I wanted to be a photojournalist. Like my desire to become a photojournalist was fueled by a desire to like show people things and see them myself, and this idea that if people see things, it will affect change, right? I think that my life and my experience has both proven and disproven that theory. I have photographed so many terrible things that it's within the power of the world, within the power of the leaders of my country, et cetera, to stop. And we don't. And, I think if you as a photojournalist are working consistently and think your photographers are going to like concretely affect change on a regular basis or even like at all, you're not paying attention. I think you're fooling yourself. And I think that the problem with that structure of like, okay, if I take photos and publish them, then I'm helping raise awareness and that's going to create change. When we sort of see that in like our current like media saturated environment with the political structures that we have, that's not really happening. If you just believe that, then I think that you're sort of tricking yourself into not analyzing your own role in what's happening and how to do it better. It's because I don't really believe that just taking pictures and publishing them is enough. I think that when you tell yourself like, okay, that photojournalism is like inherently a public service, even when we see that it often does no service, you're like giving yourself an out when actually it can be very extractive. It can reinforce stereotypes. It can reinforce the idea in wealthy, privileged countries like the US that bad things happen to bad people in bad places. It can make you feel more far away from people who are suffering rather than closer. Whereas I think what I've come to believe about my practice is that I do it because I want to. I do it because I'm curious. I do it because I'm get obsessively desperate to see things. I want to commit to them, and I start to feel emotionally close to them. And hopefully, through the process of making these images, that makes the people that I'm photographing and working with feel seen. And I think that's a service. I think that one-on-one interactions with people where I'm saying I care and I believe other people are going to care, that's important to them. And that's important to create a record. And if I learn something on a personal level, then hopefully I can communicate that and start to create small ripples. And I believe really really intensely in the ability of individuals to change and that we change each other socially and within our communities. And then for me, the work part, the publication part, I think good information is good to have out there, and having a historic record of important events is important, but it's like almost secondary, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about subjectivity and triaging the kind of the way photographs are distributed and shown with narratives and biases and uh, all of that kind of nefarious narratives that go with images, which is the negative side of photography, I guess. But as a the way you're talking sounds almost like you're a journalist first, photographer second, and I'm putting words in your mouth here, but it's kind of the feeling I'm getting. Is there what is the responsibility that comes with that? There's the fiduciary's responsibility as a photojournalist to do what? Or is it just to literally drive your own curiosity and then see what comes after? Is a responsibility to almost like post photography and see what you can do with those images and how you can hopefully drive individual awareness and individual curiosity?
Oh man, all of it. So
Obviously, it's not that simple. I'm diluting this,
no, it's
a
not.
lot. It's much more nuanced, but
That's what I think is interesting. That's what I think is important to talk about, because I think often like people who are thinking about doing this work or trying to do it better are looking for some kind of simple rule that they can follow to make it good. And the reality, you have to be constantly interrogating this and thinking about it on a case by case situation. Um, but like honestly, I think of myself as, and this is very specific to when I'm doing documentary work. I do, I shoot culture and fashion and portraiture and all this other stuff for my work. And there I'm really into just being an artist and like vibing and keep making cool stuff and trying to make stuff that looks different. And like that's great. But if I'm working on like a serious documentary project, if I'm documenting other people's lives and sensitive parts of other people's lives, then the hierarchy is human, journalist, artists. And I think that order is very important, um, because none of my work matters more than respecting somebody else's space, representation, comfort level. When you're dealing with someone else's, with someone else's life, so much has been written about this and said about this. I loved your interview with Lauren Walsh, because I thought she was just like, I was like nodding along to the whole podcast. Like she was so on point. But like the responsibilities of documenting someone else's life, especially in a delicate moment or God forbid a dangerous or tragic one, are humongous. And there you really, my ethical standard in terms of how I'm thinking about that is like, my mom is like my best friend and my hero. And like, would I be comfortable with my mom being treated this way by another photographer or journalist, right? Then in terms of the journalistic obligation, we are telling a story, and we may have quite a bit of power and privilege in terms of the audience we're going to have. So there, I think our obligation is to communicating the truth in the best way that we can see it. And I think that the truth is incredibly subjective, and almost always there are multiple truths happening in any given moment. So that's really, really tricky, because photo is a very limited medium. But I think as best as you can, you're trying to identify what matters here and what matters that I can communicate in an image. And sometimes that's a feeling. Sometimes, that's not a fact. Sometimes it's like, this was a war crime. This is evidence of a war crime. Sometimes it's like, I want you to feel your fucking heartbreaking right now. Sometimes it's, I know you guys, think that all these terrible, bad things happen to people that are so different from you, but look how beautiful this person is. Because sometimes beauty is a key to triggering the human response of like, that person is good, right? Which of course is a bunch of bullshit, but like finding the beauty is this visual recipe for, again, like hacking that empathy response, right? So there's all different ways to do it. And then the art, I'm hoping, is in service of all of that. The art in those contexts becomes in service of trying to tell that story, trying to show that respect, trying to show that love, prioritizing the other things. Like if you're going in to a war zone to make a portfolio picture, I kind of want to say two things. Like, first of all, fuck you. Second of all, all of us do that to a certain extent. So you're kind of fighting with, the two demons within you, right? Like if I wanted to be useful, I would be a medic. I'm not, because I'm selfish and I want to make art. But so this is my way. I'm also, and on the other side of that is like, I'm probably not smart enough to be a medic, but this is the best I can do for the world. And I like that's where I'm good at things. So here we are.
It's almost a way to kind of reconcile any gaps or any kind of, I guess, shortcomings that you might feel you have in your soul or your personality, right? I feel exactly the same way. It's like I feel so selfish wanting to do most things, right? So it's almost like, how can I kind of make up for that and compensate so I can still do those selfish things, but not feel too bad about it? Obviously, nowhere near on the level that you do. Tell me, let's rewind a little bit. I want to hear about how this all came, how you became you and how you became the photographer that you are today, where it all started, your backgrounds and picking up a camera.
Well, oh God, I don't know. I was, I think I was like a really curious kid and a bad student, and I really liked to make art. So I was like good at that. And so I um was always attracted to like extremes, and that used to sort of play out in, you know, being like a curiosity driven but a little bit like wayward youth. And then I I ended up in New York going to art school studying painting because that was like the thing I was good at, and that's what I was able to get here for school. Um and I was super, I was always interested in activism. I come from like very activist family and was really interested in like anarchism and socialism like as a teenager and a college student, and like, how can we change the world, like how do we fight the power, whatever. And so I was like in art school and I was making these like crazy paintings and like going to protests and like reading the usual progressive stuff. And
The
like,
young idealist.
yeah. And like, it wasn't like, I wanted to, like, I was making all these paintings and I liked it, but like, I was in a studio all the time and I like had some talent, but like, I don't think enough to like make it. And I was also kind of like, well, if I make it as an artist, I'm not sure that's the life I want. Like, I want to go see the world. I want to like go try to change things. And I also just want to be in the mix. Like, I want to see things for myself. I'm curious and I'm also mistrustful. Like, if you tell me how something went down, I'm going to be like, I need to see that for myself. Like, I trust no one. So like, actually, after I graduated college, I was like working in an art gallery and waiting tables and stuff. And I ended up getting an internship with some photojournalists because I was like, I graduated school kind of with this obsession with photojournalism. I was always looking at it and being like, wow, like you probably have to like have gone to like an Ivy League and study journalism to do that. But that's like, I missed out. Like my life is over. I'm 23 and I studied the wrong thing. And I should have been a photojournalist. And at some point I just started like applying for like internships with photojournalists and kind of I got to assist Julie Plattner and Shaul Schwartz, who are amazing journalists and photographers, and now both are filmmakers. And I was kind of like, do I need to go to school for this? And they were like, no, like you just need to do it, basically. And so, I mean, I basically just got really lucky, met the right people in New York, had a lot of mentors that taught me a whole lot, fell in with a lot of women friends, particularly, like my girlfriends, Katie Orlinski's, Kao Tu Fangshin kind of adopted me when I was like a tiny baby freelancer running around New York and, started inviting me to things and teaching me how to do things and giving me advice and community, as I started freelancing for like local papers that were paying like, $25 if we decide to publish the picture, but we're sending you on assignments, like really terrible rates, to get my foot in the door and work my way up to working for, some of the local national papers here.
Since then, you've, look at the client list that you've worked with and the projects, so many projects. So, I mean, I had a look at your link tree as well, which is just, there's so much to piece piece together from that and really kind of dive into, which probably would take us days, which hopefully we can really do maybe another time. But what is it that kind of what kind of projects really drive you today? And maybe we don't talk about clients so much, but I'm more interested to, current today, Natalie, what is it that you feel is most important for us to be maybe aware of, or at least viewing in terms of your art and your work and your journalistic endeavors? But more importantly, what is it that you're working on that's most important to you at the moment?
Thank you. Well, it's funny. I haven't like scrolled down that link tree. I'm like, oh, what's in there? So it's been a real privilege to, one of the cool things about being a freelancer, which is what almost all documentary photographers are at this point. There's very few people with jobs. I've certainly never had one, so I have no idea what that's like. But is that, I've sort of gotten to just do whatever I was passionate about for like the last decade, which has been amazing. And over time, I've started to like, really, it was almost like I didn't know what motivated me and inspired me and made me tick until I realized at some point that I was repeating myself and like gravitating towards the same shit over and over again reflexively. And, at some point I look back at my portfolio and I'm like, young people, culture, athleticism, dance in a very difficult, often very hostile environment. Like it's like that, it's like these are the like that recipe. I beeline to it wherever I go. I'm very interested in uprising and political unrest and conflict. I'm interested. I think all humans are interested in violence, and I'm no exception. I'm very interested in the most animal and the worst that we can be. And I think that holds as fascination for all of us. But maybe I have a particularly sick fixation with it because it doesn't it doesn't stop. Like we would think we would stop doing conflict. We have all this technology. We have all this, knowledge. You can ask a robot like how to cure cancer, and it's like, here you go, dummy. Like we're so advanced. And all we're doing is like using our advancement to like drone strike babies all over the world, So I think there's this part of me that, and I think it also has to do a lot with like, personal stuff and the stuff from growing up that I think is very common in people that pursue an understanding of violence as an adult, because there's this just like attraction to understanding the worst of us because it's honestly so prevalent. I think there's part of me that like, would rather have it where I can see it than like pretend it's not happening. Like it's actually more disconcerting to me to like have the like darkness of humanity like somewhere like amorphously behind my back than to just like be looking right at it. And maybe if I can understand it, I can like, well, I want to say fix it, but I don't really think I can fix it. But so, okay, so that was very conceptual. In terms of practically speaking, the way that's played out, I worked a lot. When I was first getting started, I was in New York. New York is an incredible city. It's got like everything. But, first I was doing assignment work, like murder scene, politician at a podium, broken water main, protest, whatever. And eventually I, started traveling a little bit. And in 2014, I was, I kind of realized that like the career I wanted was to work internationally and cover like major global events that had particular interests for me, which is a lot about like this question of like, can the people change things? Like, does violence work? Does activism work? Like, can power structures be broken? And I went down to Venezuela in 2014 to cover a huge wave of uprisings against Nicolas Maduro, the successor of Hugo Chavez. And I felt super head over heels in love with Venezuela. And I spent like the next 8 years sort of bouncing between New York and Caracas, like covering the subsequent failure of the Venezuelan state and then reconsolidation into a horrific murderous dictatorship. And And also meanwhile, kind of yo-yoing between there and documenting the catastrophic decline of any semblance of democracy in my own country and reckonings for our racism and human rights violations. So, that my process has been a lot about, because I was in Venezuela a lot, I ended up working a lot in Latin America in general. And I started this sort of process also on a sort of personal level of working in places that were in crisis and moments of extreme crisis. And then trying to go beyond the news, trying to figure out like, okay, I love to cover breaking news. I think often documentary photographers are sort of separated into like, do you do like features and human interest, or do you do like breaking news? And I'm like, I want to shoot the breaking news. I love it. I'm fascinated by it. Like nothing gives me more energy or makes me think harder than those types of moments, as much as they are horrible. But then I also want to like commit to the stories that are the causes and then the effects of a breaking news situation. So like in Venezuela, I went to cover the uprisings, but then I ended up spending years and years working on like different vignettes and stories of this like giant personal project, looking at the human effects and particularly effects on women and young people of the crisis there. And all of that learning was also really helping me think about how to better address rising political polarization, violence, and erosion of a functional state in my own country. Because there's this crazy thing that happens, I think, when you travel a lot, which you've probably experienced, which is that I feel like often when I'm moving around and from place to place, I'm kind of jumping a timeline. Like you're seeing like, oh, this political stage, like I sort of recognize this from like this other place. And if we're here now on that timeline, then I sort of know what happens next and it's going to be bad, So that there's this way in which it's just such a privilege to get to sort of move around and learn from these different moments in time and different geographies and cultures, obviously. And my most recent work has been covering the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. I basically came back to New York and was here for like a year during the pandemic. And then it had become increasingly difficult to cover Venezuela as a foreigner. And also a lot of my best friends in Venezuela, like Adriana Loureiro, Andrea Hernandez, Lexi Parra, Natalie Quintero, Oscar Castillo, like all of my best friends are from Venezuela, are photographers who had it super well covered. And I was like, you know what? It's too hard for me to do good work here, and y'all are doing it better than I could. So like, what's next for me, right? And Russia invaded Ukraine, and I had always wanted to go, partially because my great-grandparents are Ukrainian, and so I went there. Kind of a similar thing happened where I went and was horrified and heartbroken by what I saw, but I was also like, holy shit, I love this place. And so the past 3 years I've been working on covering the conflict and, doing a lot of news stories, but in between there, I started working on a project called In This Day, which started off as a stills project, looking at couples in love in the context of the war, which was sort of my pet project to keep myself sane, collecting. Because I was in my first full-scale conflict, it was horrible beyond words, obviously. And I kept like, I was like, well, what can I say that's not just about how awful this is? It was more about like what I love about this place. And I kept seeing what people in love would do for each other in the context of this war. And I started like, and you would see all these incredibly like cinematic romantic moments of like, soldiers with their girlfriends walking hand in hand, and elderly couples, and it would be this like little bright light in a very emotionally dark landscape. And so I started kind of early on in my downtime when I was in Ukraine being like, hey, can I take your picture? Can you tell me about your love story? which Ukrainians are like, what? Like, you don't want to talk about like what the most traumatic thing I saw today was, it became this really cool way to connect with people. And I've been working on that for about 3 years. And earlier this year, I started working on turning that into a documentary film. And I'm going to stop talking because, oh my God, I've been modeling for like,
no, please keep on going. It's fascinating. And that documentary is what is it sounds like you're almost the inception stage still, maybe. But what is the plan? I mean, funding, still need funding. What is the kind of timeline for that? How are you kind of piecing it all together at the moment?
Bless you for asking. So and I say we because I have amassed a really amazing team of Ukrainian and European and American producers and helpers who are helping me learn how to make a film. It's my first one. And so we've got, I'm learning so much, and it's also, it's such a cool experience for me to start to learn a new communications medium, because it's like, I've been learning like my whole career. I've been trying to communicate through stills, which is, I love, but it's so specific. And I feel kind of like I've got like the shackles off now, because I'm like, we can use sound and it moves. And so I'm having the experience of like shooting video in Ukraine, and like, I feel like, when you first started photographing and you would like take a picture of like a tree and you'd be like, look, I made this like crazy poetic photo of a tree.
Yeah.
And like, now your students or your mentees come to you with those and you're like, oh, sweetie, that was a great tree. And I'm like totally doing that with photo, like I see like the wind move through the trees and I like film it and I'm like, I did magic, so I'm really enjoying being a beginner. And also I'm just, this project needed to become a film because the people I'm collaborating with, the couples that I'm working with, are the most fucking incredible people I've ever met. And they inspire me so much. They've become friends. Their stories are just unbelievable. And so we've made, I've shot some video, and we're also working with a couple. So the concept for the film is going to mix a lot of first-person footage with reportage footage. And we are, it's the film is ready to go. We just need a fair bunch of money, which I'm told to my photo brain, it sounds really expensive. To filmmakers, apparently my film is cheap. So if anybody wants to support a cheap, expensive documentary project in Ukraine, please contact me.
Yeah, we'll leave. Is there do you have a funding site, or just email you, or how
just email me? Just email me.
Okay.
Yeah, we're no funding site, but if you want to help, if you want to support our amazing team,
we'll put your phone number, profile picture, and email. No, I'm joking. We'll link your website.
Okay, just email.
Yeah. I'm really, really so happy for you that you're kind of going into this new format. I know what that feels like. It's both kind of challenging, daunting, but that's almost the exciting part of it, right? Like a little kid at school learning a new skill. Where did the idea come from that it needed to now be a motion picture? Was it kind of an external influence in the team that you're working with, kind of advising that, or why turn from stills to motion for this specific project?
It's a great question. So I think part of it was that I the process for the stills project, which has been, it's published in the Washington Post and it won an award from Aperture, and I'm very proud of it. Particularly, which I think is all 1000% due to the people in the photographs are so beautiful and so cool, and their stories will just make your eyes pop open, And I was, for years in Ukraine now, whenever I had an opportunity, sometimes I pitched like chapters of it to publications or got a little bit of grant money, or even just between covering, just terrible parts of the war itself, I was meeting with couples, photographing their lives, doing long interviews, making portraits of them. And and it would sort of be like, okay, like I would keep in touch with them and find out what was going on with their stories. But I was just like, this is not enough. Like, I want you to hear Anastasio's voice. Like, I want you to like see the way Ruslana and Ivan touch each other. Not still. I want you to see the motion. To I want y'all to hear the bombs, and I want you to know that they're coming for these people. They're going to ruin these lives. It's not theoretical. It's not abstract. It's not a shiny explosion that you can cover in a still and be like, well, that's a really cool shade of red. This is these beautiful young people that, it's about to be 3 years of their country is just under relentless invasion from Russia. And speaking of things that should stop yesterday, 3 years ago, if people would just do what they needed to do, this is one of those cases. And so, I think in a certain way, I felt like it was just, I could keep collecting these stories and it would fulfill me because I can photograph Ukrainian couples in love and talk to them forever. But like, it wasn't, I felt limited by the medium to tell the depth of these stories. And the other thing that happened on a business level was that I got contacted by several like movie Hollywood people, some of them that talked a lot like used car salesmen, being like, can you sign us over the rights to this thing you're doing? We want to make a documentary. And I was like, I've seen this movie before and I think you should fuck off.
Yeah.
But actually, that's a good idea, And so then I started talking to like filmmaker homies, like, okay, so what is a documentary? Like, how do I do this?
Can't wait to see it.
Me too. Thank you.
But this just going to hover over this a little bit more. This is not breaking news, right? So you love covering breaking news stories. What made you kind of see in between those moments and see the smaller but just as visceral stories, such as Ukrainians in love during conflict?
Well, I think for me, it's like, because it is a breaking news story. Like that's the thing. It's like, I feel like if you go to a breaking news story with the goal being to get the most dramatic images that you possibly can and leave, and then go on to the next one, then your experience is going to be super surface level. But my interest in breaking news is, first of all, I am interested in these massive historical events, which are usually catastrophes. But what I'm really, I'm interested because I want to know, like, I want to understand all of the factors and all of the human experience that has to align to create something so big that it gets the world's attention. And then I want to understand what happens afterwards. So it's like, to me, like, starting to photograph people in love and film people in love, for me, it was a way of working out both something that felt like more complex and nuanced and human to me in terms of how to talk about the experience of conflict beyond just like, this goes boom, it's very bad. And then like, but the news is breaking all around these people all the time. I'm still there. They're still there. Like it is still a breaking news story, even though it's not breaking anymore. It's a 3-year-old conflict that needs to stop. But like, yeah. So I guess it's like, for me, it's not a separation. Like, I am like attracted to that thing, but I don't want to just chase the, because we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, but the world has a sort of like, I think because of the economy of media, because of the way that we are distributing our journalism and the way that capitalism is affecting that, particularly, we sort of have this like tiny attention span where like the eye of the world is on one thing at a time for like 3 days and then it moves on. But every single one of those things is affecting lives, thousands, millions of them, for decades after. So like, that's, it's like, it's still the same story. To me, there's not so much distinction between breaking news and what happens before and after.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, and also, censorship plays a role in all of this, wherever you might live, right? Depending on what gets in front of what eyes under what narrative, partisan or non-partisan, and if there is such a thing as non-partisan journalism, right? I think it's very difficult to discern between these lines, and of course, it's extremely complex. All of this is so complex, and the way that you might tell a story, in this case, what you're doing in Ukraine, it arguably can have a bigger impact for you and for those people seeing it, because it's almost more intimate. It's almost more of a human, more of a real and close human aspect that people can relate to quite directly. Whereas maybe, and I'm not saying this is true, but maybe breaking news with shocking images all the time, people may become a little bit desensitized to that. Maybe not on a visual level, but maybe on a psychological level. And there isn't necessarily that relatable aspect. But I'm definitely not one to comment on that. Where do you see the role of journalism and photojournalism today? And I know that's such a, we can't answer that really directly, but I'm interested to hear why you think certain stories reach the public's eyes and certain stories don't. Why maybe the Ukrainian conflict, we don't really hear much about it anymore, apart from trickles of information here and there. Why the Venezuelan history of which is still ongoing doesn't really get talked about anymore. Why issues in Africa or Myanmar that are always ongoing and under the surface and bubbling away behind maybe closed doors don't get to see the light of day. What is it with this information ecosystem that we're failing at, and where does the role of photojournalism, or where should the role of photojournalism be placed within that?
Oh boy, Matt. Oh boy. Okay. I
Talk to me
mean,
about truth. So that's really what I'm getting at here.
so okay, the industry. This is there's like so many things I can say about this, but like my like short answer is like it's the capitalism, stupid. Not you,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Hey, I'm
like
with you. Yeah.
I think that treating documentation of world events and distributing information as a business has been absolutely cancerous to our field. The what journalists are still taught to think of what we do as a public service, but the companies that employ us are run at a top-down level as a business. And the fact that the businesses are counting fucking clicks and engagement and all of these idiotic internet metrics absolutely destroys the structure of mission of communicating what's important to the world based on what's important. Which I'm not saying was done well pre-internet, but I think it's what we would be doing well if we weren't worried about clicks, and if like the generation of journalists that I'm proud to be a member of was in charge and is starting to be in charge, So like, first of all, I think that that's like a really, really incredibly corrosive influence on the structures within we're working, right? I love the editorial clients that I work for, and I work with such smart, supportive, conscientious people. And I also am part of communities and communities of activists, and and I'm also a teacher and a mentor, and I work with a lot of people that are like furious at that part's not in quotes, that are furious at the mainstream media. The mainstream media is in quotes. They're really, really angry at a lot of my clients who I work with on a regular basis, because they feel like they're not being properly represented. Like, these narratives are getting, whitewashed, and, and a lot of that is happening. But then I think we really have to sort of examine what that actually means, right? People talk about the mainstream media as a sort of blanket term when we don't know if they're talking about like Fox News or the New Yorker or Harper's or like their local newspaper. It's all very different things. But what is happening in all of those structures is that editorial priorities are not being determined by what people need to know based on what, they're being determined by engagement. And we all know that internet engagement is essentially a metric of how well the thing is working as an incredibly addictive drug. And like what wins is like stupid memes and like cat pictures and like horrific images of violence. So like, I feel like the communication between between journalists and the audience is totally broken. And then what that means is that we have no resources to invest in doing this work properly and ethically. If you're trying to do something on a budget that's as hard as documentary work, what ends up getting shaved down is commitment, time with people, doing things ethically and properly, and it gets all very fucked up.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, go on.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to throw in there. There's an inherent kind of mistrust of institutions these days to kind of deliver people the truth. In fact, it's almost impossible to know where you can go to get a fact. And even if you find a fact, maybe you don't trust that it's a fact, and you have to do, a number of fact checking exercises to really believe that it's a fact. I don't know where that mistrust really, or that trust really broke down over the years, and I can empathize with those journalists that get frustrated with the legacy media and these larger media institutions who might not deliver what should be delivered for various reasons. And we find ourselves in this place like you described, where we have to capture people's attention within 2 seconds, whether that's on CNN or whether it's on Instagram or whether it's on X or whatever platforms we get our information from, and our little echo chambers. How we penetrate that, I mean, it's almost too little too late now. I don't really know where we go from here in terms of, getting back to a more organized, trustworthy information landscape.
I mean, I think there's another side of it, which is that I think that like the structure, part of the idea of trust in media, I think, is like what's anachronism? Is that the word? Like it's something that's it didn't make sense. Like I think that historically the idea of like the neutral journalist who was the arbiter of right and wrong was also total bullshit. Because, what we're talking about were like rich white men going all over the world, telling the world what their experience was and then flying home.
And it's all controlled by humans and human psychology and human thoughts and narrative, right?
Yeah. And misconceptions and some idea of like the journalists as the arbiter of truth, which I don't believe we are. I think we're just the arbiter of what we see. So I think that my hope is that in a certain way, like some of this is the system being broken down because it needed to break down because it was like structurally flawed, in the sense that like we need so much more representation. And part of the reason there's distrust is that now it's not like publication is run only by like super elites, in the sense that like everybody can communicate across the internet, and there's first person on the ground sourcing available for almost anything. But that also means that there's this like cacophony of voices, which is what you're referring to. So like you sort of pick and choose your truth depending on what you're comfortable with. And I think that sort of points us to like an important factor, which is like, I really do think that like many, many overlapping contradictory truths are happening in any given moment. And that's much more true than saying that there was one. And so I think in terms of duty as a photographer, I'm definitely not going to fix capitalism or the media industry. Definitely way above my pay grade. I still am going to be really grateful to work with great minds that I get to work with and have an opportunity to publish widely and like work with people I trust, and hope that but I feel like all I can do is try to be trustworthy myself. And that means making myself, first of all, something that's not, I think, been historically practiced enough at all in journalism, and that I think people are talking about more and that I really believe in, is making yourself as an individual journalist and photographer accountable to the communities that you photograph. That's the first way that we can build back trust, right? Rather than going and taking your picture and winning your Pulitzer, and oops, that picture got published and got somebody executed and I didn't even know because they couldn't reach me, or the people in the photograph didn't want you there and they're crying because they hate you and you're photographing them anyways and misrepresenting their experience. Like, when we as, I feel like thanks in huge part to like technology, I'm totally accessible. If I post something that people don't like, they are going to see it. They're going to send me a message. They're going to let me know. And it also means I, as a journalist, a year after going to a place across the country or across the world, I can like ping somebody and be like, hey, is this still accurate? Do you feel comfortable with this? Would this put you in danger? And so having that ongoing relationship so that you're not this removed journalist on a hill that's not accountable to the communities, but you're actually like initiating that accountability and that deep long-term relationship and making sure that people do feel accurately and safely represented with our work, then rather than the experience which we encounter all the time, which is you go somewhere and they say, I don't want to talk to you, don't take my picture because the last journalist was an asshole. He published photos and the Russians bombed us the next day because it was a target, right? Hopefully I would really like to be the journalist that they say that girl kept her word. She kept in touch. She published what I said to her. She respected the rules that we gave her in terms of what was safe and what wasn't and what felt like important and what wasn't. And some people would argue that that's not being objective, but I think that's stupid. I think that's, again, being like human first.
And unrealistic. But I think I'm glad you kind of brought this up as we dive into more of the ethics behind photography in general. What is, I think I can speak for all of photography when I say we've got to be very careful and we have a responsibility to not necessarily just take all the time, not to have that almost, I was speaking on a local aspect here, not to have that kind of influencer philosophy where we just go, take, leave, right? And the same could be said across many depths of that philosophy across many genres. Photojournalism is probably the most apparent and the most nuanced in that respect. Because I imagine, and I want you to educate me here, because I'm really interested in learning the details behind what you just talked about in terms of how you even go about that process of finding out what potentially the impact might be, not just in the closed community, but in the wider community, and the potential actions that might, have a butterfly effect from that. Who controls that? And how do you even, maintain that integrity through what I'm sure takes a lot of time to do? If you go to somewhere like Ukraine, and you hadn't been there before, maybe you've got to really spend weeks just, finding your fucking feet, right? Learning about the place, getting over the initial shock of everything, and then trying to understand, okay, how do I go about doing this? And I know this is multiple questions in one, but I guess just tell me and educate me about the photojournalist process of dealing with ethics on both a high level and a more of a specific one, if you can.
So, I think it is a lot of questions. And first of all, it's like there's no one size fits all, right? It's like if your goal is, like, first you want to identify your goal. Do no harm. Actually try to collaborate with people and, do something good that everybody feels good about. How to get there is going to change every time, right? And it may even change like the same place, the same community on a different day. So it's a moving target, and you have to be aware that it's a really hard process. And it's one of those things that's like a practice, not like a goal achieved. It's like, okay, I understand that photojournalism is not, and this is what I was talking about where I was saying that if we think that what we're doing is just inherently good by doing it, then we're already blowing it ethically, because you want to go into every new situation, every time you're photographing someone else's life, you want to go in with, I think, total humility, right? That's the first thing. It's like you want to go in. I always tell my students, you want to be a permanent student. You want your mentality to be, I'm arriving. I am not coming in with that, I'm the journalist, I'm here to take a photo of X because this is the story. Then you already failed. If you already know what you're doing, what the story is, what the picture is, then you're not you're not learning, you're not documenting real life, you're looking for like an illustration of a preconceived notion. So you really do have to go in every time aware of your own ignorance. And then you really want to ask the people that you're photographing to be your teachers, right? And to find people that are willing to do that work with you, that want to collaborate. You want that process. Again, it's like there's these old tropes of, sort of like you're the photographer and you're asking the questions and you're taking the pictures and then you go. But I'm really looking to create a relationship where we're like, we're asking each other questions, we're learning a lot. And so it also means, so I am looking for people that actively want to collaborate with me. That means that I'm sort of, when I'm looking to do a story about a certain theme, I'm asking, okay, like, have you had this experience? Is my thesis here even right? Like, can you educate me a little bit about it? Do you want to like spend some time together? What are your concerns for safety? What are your concerns for your emotional safety? What are your ground rules? What can we show? What can we not show? And if you're sort of it was interesting because you were talking with Lauren Walsh about like the ethics of like photographing when you're embedded, right? And this is, when you're working with the military, they have very, very strict rules to protect their interests, and you either follow them or you lose your access, right? It's the same when you're working with somebody who's powerful or somebody who's rich, right? They're going to have a PR team and they're going to say, you can ask this, not that. You can go here, not there. You can shoot their left side, not their right side, right? But as soon as you get into people that have been, the victims of violence or are, not so privileged in some way or are being marginalized, then they don't have that PR team and they don't have those rules. So your responsibility is to create them collaboratively with them to protect their interests. And then I don't think that's like surrendering our agency as a photographer. I think that's creating trust. And then if we as individuals create that trust and that accountability, and one thing that's just really basic and really important is everybody gets my phone number. Everybody gets my Instagram. If you want to reach out to me, and I tell them like, this is what I think is going to happen with the photograph. This is what I don't know. Maybe I'm shooting this for a personal project and I hope to publish it in the future. I'll let you know when that happens. Maybe it's going to go in Rolling Stone, but okay, actually, damn, they want to translate it to German. That's a different, whatever thing. So like, you want the communication lines to be open, and the way to make it safe, both physically and emotionally, is to ask. And sometimes you have to like. I use this example a lot when I think because I am a Spanish speaker and I have a lot of experience in Latin America. I work a lot with stories about immigration in the U.S. and I work a lot with people who are undocumented. And there's this huge power dynamic at play there, where like I'm an American white journalist representing a big media. And so often, people are scared and they just don't want to say no to you because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. And they're afraid that trouble might mean like detention or deportation or lack of resources for their kids or whatever. So it's not just, is it okay? Can I take your picture? And somebody says like, yeah. It's like, hold on. This is going to go in the New York Times. It's going to be published on the internet in English and Spanish. It's going to be your face. Can we talk about the consequences? You don't have to do this. I'm at this shelter, but I have nothing to do with the shelter. It's really explaining your positionality and really being curious about everybody else's. I think it's a very competitive industry, and people that get into journalism and photography tend to be pretty like assertive or aggressive. And that's great if you're using that in service of your own ethics. But sometimes there's a lot of pressure, from bosses or from competition to like get your yes and get your picture. And we have to just turn that off, because what you want is like it's a little bit like, I always say this, but it's like, continuous affirmative consent. It's like the sex standards that we have now. It's the same idea,
I love that you really talked about earlier, almost knowing thyself, knowing your own ignorance. I think it's so important in any genre of photography or art, or just in life, but especially when you're dealing with such sensitive subject matters, right? Especially in photojournalism. the other side of the world in maybe a country that speaks a foreign language. It's just so important to kind of push that aside with the ego and be that listener and be able to try and understand and that culture and that individual as much as possible, to allow them to at least try and understand you and what you're doing with these photos and what you're trying to do, and not just take from them, but also maybe help them in some way, or at least give them an experience they are not going to be, like you said, scared of. I've experienced that with just normal portrait photography, not in conflict areas, right? So I think that's extremely important, but that takes time. Time on the ground, and if you are on assignment, and if you have bosses, and how much does funding come into this, right? How much pressure do you receive as a photographer when money is on the line, deadlines are on the line, attention spans are on the line? I know you said just switch it off, but it can't be easy.
Well, I think that's where like also, you start, I think there's this like a little bit of a trope in media of like this idea that like the bad bosses are on the other end of the line.
Yeah.
My picture, I don't care who dies. And then we're on
Yeah.
you're like, oh, please.
That's
And
TV for you, I guess.
it's almost, I'm extraordinarily lucky, but, working in the print media, it's almost never my experience. But what I did have to learn how to do is to feel, because what you were talking about before, I think is so important about the ego, right? Most of the bad behavior, most of the stuff we don't want to see in photographers in the field, it's usually coming from fear, right? It's your ego. You have imposter syndrome. You don't want to admit how ignorant you feel. You don't want the other photographers to see that you're scared, that you don't know what's going on. And one of the things that I really had the privilege to witness a lot as a photographer working in the field with like great writers and great other photographers, especially because breaking news situations, there actually tend to be a lot of us around, for better and worse, is that the greats are asking dumb questions, rapid fire all day. When I was really like young and starting out, I would see one of my like absolute heroes, and it would just be like, like, what's this? What's that? Who's this? Who's that? And I'm like, and I would be sitting there like, damn, even I know that. But eventually I realized that like the really brilliant artists and journalists, their ego, they've learned to take their ego out of it, right? And so they're not operating from that sense of fear that I don't want to ask dumb questions because people are going to think I'm dumb. They just want to do a good job. And so like, for me, it was really helpful to think from this ethical framework of like, okay, definitely I'm going to embrace my identity as a dumbass foreigner. And I am going to commit to staying for a long time to learn how to do this well. And you're exactly right that the investment of time is huge, and that's very tricky. So what I try to do is, to like embrace my own ignorance and just give myself as much time to learn what I need to do in order to produce, like, it's like however big the story is, I need to commit that much time and that long-term relationships in order to get there, to do it well. I use assignments to my advantage in that way, because what I try to do in order to get that time is pitch little stories, smaller, not, no, or little, all other people's experience, but I'll pitch like shorter, more bite-sized, easier to manage things that I think I can do right in the same place over and over, try to commit and not, just covering breaking news. This is what kind of actually like one of the ways that I've made it work. In a breaking news situation, let's say the first several months of a war, there's a ton of work to go around. Now, like, for example, when I first got to Ukraine, I had no knowledge. I was a total ignorant. But because it was like my job was just kind of like, it was simple. It was just document what's happening, document the human toll of this, document the refugees, document the strike zones, document the mass graves. And it was, not to say that stuff is straightforward, but I wasn't trying to like offer some complex narrative on top of that. I was just doing my job, and it felt really straightforward. And that also gave me time to learn enough to start thinking about like, okay, what would I like to say about this? So it's like actually using the existing systems, which are shorter, to piece together the knowledge that I need. Um, and of course, very often that does mean you have this dynamic of being sent into a very delicate situation and needing to work quickly and getting that pressure. But I find that even when you don't have a lot of time, if you're very open with people about like, okay, like hi, this is the worst day of your life. It's a funeral for your son who is a soldier, right? But like, actually, okay, let me find, I'm not going to try to talk to his mom today. That's wildly inappropriate. But there's an uncle who seems like he's, in the family, but he's got his shit relatively together. And that's the person I'm going to ask permission. Because actually, I think it's likely that this family would like their son's loss to be honored. I'm going to unobtrusively ask permission, and I'm going to be very willing to, if the answer is no, I'm going to walk outside this church and I'm going to call my editor and say the family doesn't want us there. And if I'm fired forever for respecting that boundary, so be it. But it never in history has an edit. It's like our job is also to communicate what's going on to the bosses. And most of the people that are commissioning me really appreciate that I will call them and be like, shit, I actually think that the undocumented family that you sent me to shoot, I think we're going to get them deported if we do this story. They're not going to say like, Natalie, you jerk, get me my picture. They're going to say, thank you. I'm glad we didn't ruin somebody's life today. Let's find a different, and then, and if the answer is yes, then you just move as gently as possible. You do your job as well as possible. So I think there's a lot of, even in a short space of time, when I was shooting the uprisings after the murder of George Floyd here in New York, shooting protests, especially, around here, is getting more and more delicate as the situation changes and people are really pissed off the media and the government for good reason. But it's still important to document these things. So I would stand up on like a park bench in front of a huge crowd and be like, hi, I'm Natalie. I'm shooting for the New York Times today. If you hate that, I'm just letting you know where the pictures are going so that I'm not like photographing you without your knowledge. And people would kind of be like, she's crazy, but then people would kind of give me a gesture of like, no, stay away from me. Or like, okay, thanks for, it's like, there's always a way that you can try to get consent, even in chaotic situations. And you just do your best, and it's not perfect. But I do think the editors also just really appreciate when you're taking the time as the person who's on the ground to ask the questions and to let them know, like, okay, I actually think that like the plan we had for today coming in here, now that I'm seeing it, I don't think it's safe, but I think I can make a really cool anonymized portrait of this person that will be really emotive. Or like,
Yeah.
This woman is undocumented and I don't think it's safe for her to be on the record, but there's another woman here with a really, similar situation who I don't think is at risk of deportation. So it's kind of thinking on your feet in that way too.
Yeah, maybe we do the bosses and the higher echelons of media and magazines and all different types. Maybe we do them a little bit of disservice. Certainly, ignorance like me who don't really do that kind of work. It's you get this quite rightly probably this trope of these big old mean white fat bosses who just want to make the next paycheck as fast as possible. So yeah, thanks for enlightening us on that.
I feel like most people want to do a good job, and most people,
Yeah.
especially nobody's in journalism that got rich. Like most people really want to support you. So like, if you can explain what your thinking is, and if you also commit to learning the background and the context or the language and the regional and cultural considerations so that you can help explain it to people how we can do a better job, and they'll appreciate you and hire you more. And it's also good for business. Like nobody's like, I've almost never encountered that, like that bad guy. That's not really how it works. I think it's much more insidious pressure and a lot of people being afraid to ask questions all the way up the chain.
Well, and public narrative and public perception fueled by social media. I don't want to say it, but most people in life are good people. Whether they're bosses of big companies or the little people, wherever you might find them in conflict areas or not, I know it's very difficult to kind of say that with so much going on in the world these days, but most people you work with, most people you come across on a daily basis are people that want to be good people. That might be misdirected, might be miscommunicated, and we might be polarized across many different areas of life. But you know, we get up each day and we're usually surrounded mostly by good people who want to try and do good. So, and I think it's easy to kind of go down that route of, well, mistrusting everything and thinking that everyone's out there to get you, right? Whether you're working with a boss or working independently. Tell me about, another type of conflict on a much more superficial level. And I saw this, maybe one of your latest projects. You did a project on the UFC for Rolling Stone. I'm a huge UFC fan, so I want to hear all about it.
I totally agree that most people are good people. I really believe that. I think that even I've in my work, I have met people that are like stone cold killers that I just don't think are bad
Mm,
people. That are everybody's kind of doing their best, which is anyways. But yeah, so moving on to the UFC, which is full of all kinds of people.
all
Um,
kinds of people.
yeah, that literally just published in Rolling Stone
Yeah,
yesterday.
it's awesome.
Shout outs to Sasha Leiko, one of my absolute favorite editors to work with, for kicking me the dream assignment.
Oh, my dream assignment. So
It
good.
was. Oh, I mean, I grew up spending like a fair amount of time as like a teenager, like sitting in the weed clouds while the guys I was hanging out with were watching UFC. So like
Oh, really?
I got
Okay.
exposed. I didn't
Cool.
exposed to it like that much, but I
Yeah.
never. And I when I got the assignment, I was like, cool. Like, I have a friend in Venezuela who's a MMA fighter who's amazing, but like, I didn't like, I didn't know much about it. But my friend Jack Crosby, who does train MMA, is the writer, and his article is fantastic. It will be in my link tree later if you reminded me I need to add that. So everybody should go read his great article, and you can check out the
Keep
photos.
adding to your link tree.
Um, but it was fascinating. It was, so this story is about how UFC particularly has become a sort of MAGA bastion because of Dana White, the president of UFC's relationship with Donald Trump. But what was cool about working on this, and it goes back to so much of the stuff that we're talking about, is that it's really complicated. I was really fascinated with so much of my work has focused on femininity, which is just I think by virtue of like who I become friends with, so much of my work I end up making friends, and my friends become a huge influence on what I document and like what worlds I'm sort of brought into. And like as a woman, I tend to like vibe with other women, and then I end up making these sort of like odes to my women friends and their communities and like resilient women in difficult spaces. So this was this cool thing where like an assignment brought me into this hyper masculine world. And also it was really fun to be super ignorant. Like it's this super, it's super dynamic. The athleticism is incredible. The way people are sort of playing chess with their bodies is wild. And, it was also just such a cool learning experience. Again, thinking of yourself as a student, because I'm going into these amateur and semi-professional and professional matches. And I had Jack, who like is such an MMA nerd, and he's like I'm watching these fights, and he would be like, yeah, no, and then he did this move, and that was a point disqualification, and so this other thing, and oh, there's a backstory. So I had this amazing teacher to like help me understand what's going on, because I would be looking at these fights, and at first I was like just not, Jack would be like, did you see that? And I was like, see what? Like, I don't understand what just happened. But it was really cool to be completely fresh on something.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really exciting way to be photographing. And of course, it's like the lights and the costumes and the music and the crowd. It's so dynamic and full of energy, which is Matt's kind of my favorite type of vibe to shoot. And then I loved the complexities of the hyper machismo in this space, because I actually, I think one of the things I always try to do when I'm photographing is because I tend to photograph really extreme things and things that can almost be a caricature.
Yeah.
like MMA, right? It's just like, whoa, these two big, strong guys are kicking the shit out of each other. But so there's that level of it. And then I was like, well, wow, there's actually this like real like intimacy and tenderness and almost vulnerability under there. And like there was, on the political side, we photographed this big match at Madison Square Garden where like Trump rolled in with like Kid Rock on the left and Elon Musk on the right under like a spotlight, it's and they were screaming like USA, and I
That
was
was
just
a
kind
Charles Oliveira fight, I think.
yeah, but it was so interesting, right? Because it's not a monolith. Like Charles Oliveira won his fight and like didn't go kiss the ring, right? And like I was like, noted. Like there's, it's also just fascinating. I was kind of obsessed with like, I had this amazing, such a cool part of my job, right? I'm suddenly ringside at this fight. I'm 10 feet away from Trump and Elon, Kid Rock, and I was literally like across the ring from them. So I was able to just sit there and stare at their faces, responding to the spectacle. And that was kind of fascinating, right? Because Elon's response to witnessing violence, like what was going on in his eyes, frankly, was pretty freaky.
Yeah.
Donald looked really bored, honestly.
Yeah,
But it
he
was
goes to a lot of fights, and my wife is sat here next to me, kind of chuckling with me. Charles Oliveira is like our favorite fighter. And we remember watching that fight, and yeah, he's such a good man, a incredible fighter, but he does so much for the community, and came from so many dark places, as do many of these fighters do, and that's one of the romantic things that we like about UFC. These stories, and you mentioned vulnerability. There's so much vulnerability with these fighters, as much as skill, heart, courage. And the outsider just looks at these two guys, or women, right? Some of these women fighters are just unbelievable. Have so much inspiration and respect for them. But like you said, it's extremely complex. And yeah, Donald Trump is often at many of the big UFC fights. There's another one tomorrow as we're recording this. I guess he might be there, but he's probably too busy with his first term, but second term.
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. So yeah, I loved that story. As soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, fantastic. What there's so many kind of layers to it, not just with the fighters, right? But with the culture surrounding it. So fantastic job. Super jealous. How long did that take? Was it a few months that you kind of spent engrossed with it?
Yeah, we were going to fights and trainings for a couple months, and it was, and I got really into it. Like I ended up, shooting, like, don't get any ideas, but like I was shooting extra because I was just fascinated. I was, can we go to another fight? And Chuck ended up taking me to like one of his gyms to like start taking kickboxing classes. So that was a dude. It's super cool. And I love that Oliveira is your favorite fighter because like I don't know anything about this world, but he was my favorite. Like I was like, that's like amazing. And I feel validated that I had a good instinct.
Yeah, fantastic. How do you balance I mean, your by the way, I don't know if I said it, your images from that project were fantastic, and I love the way you balanced almost some more journalistic or documentary action shots with some more intimate and a couple of abstract shots in there. The one that you got of Trump was just fantastic. It just really inspired curiosity into what was kind of going through his brain at that time, and but from more of an abstract perspective that we could all kind of have an objective curiosity surrounding it. So yeah, I really loved it. How do you balance the aesthetics with your images? I mean, I think that documentary photography, photojournalism can often portray that aesthetics doesn't really matter, and obviously ethics balancing with aesthetics is what you have to get right. What is your approach with the aesthetic side, coming from a painting background and doing other genres and wanting art to be in that formula as well? What is your approach to generally to aesthetics when taking images?
And thanks for thanks, man. The Trump thing was so hard because we were stuck across the cage and he was so close, but I wasn't allowed to. I I kept trying to like run around, and like the Secret Service and the UFC guards were like, get the fuck out, and I was like, oh, like I kept trying to like squirrel over and like pretend that I didn't know that I was not supposed to leave my little spot. And it was not working. And so it was one of those situations where because I had to shoot through all of these lights and all of these cages, I was like, all right, embrace the difficulty. Like I can't erase this thing, so I have to make it work in the thing. So it means a lot that you liked it, because that was struggle. I was like, what am I gonna do? I'm not gonna have a picture of Trump, but I'm 10 feet away from him. I think, I love what you said, that like the sort of balance of aesthetics and ethics is basically what we do, because I think that's the whole thing, right? And just like we've been talking about all night morning, like every situation you enter has a different calculus. So like, I love to shoot with a flash. I love to play with lights. I like to really, aesthetically, I think the painter without a documentary journalism background, like, what I'm inspired by is, all different like painting forms and like fashion photography and music videos and film, and places where like the aesthetics are more prioritized. Like that's where I'm like really drawing a lot of my visual inspiration and what I get excited to see. And so like if I'm in if I'm in a situation that is not so ethically or emotionally delicate, then like that's where I want to go nuts, right? And I really want to play aesthetically. If I'm in a very delicate situation, then I'm not going to pop a flash in people's face, because it's disrespectful and it's disgusting. And I'm not going to like prioritize my aesthetics over your comfort or attracting attention to myself if what I really need to be is quiet and unobtrusive. So like, then it's like, okay, well, how do I make something? I am very interested in trying to enter every situation and make an image that's different in some way. Sometimes that means making it abstract, or, focusing on like a sort of easily forgotten detail, thinking about photographing a feeling, as opposed to like, I'm much more interested in the feeling that you're going to get than the literal documentation part. I think that,
Right.
that's just where I'm at. Like, I also love work that does just beautiful visual documentation. That's a little bit more straightforward. It's just not where my brain goes to. I'd rather things be sort of really evocative and a little rough than like really clean and like literal narrative for me. Partly, and I'm given that privilege partly because there's so many people that are doing the other thing fantastically. So like, but I think it's like a lot of it is just sort of like almost like muscle memory and instinct, and and then keeping in the front of your, like, part of that is just what you're attracted to in the moment. And I think as any photographer, it's really important to lean into what you personally are attracted to, so that you're really sort of giving space for your own voice and tastes to take over, so that you have your own style, right? And then the added layer is thinking like, how do I use aesthetics to communicate what I'd like to communicate about this? So like, I love shooting a spectacle like the MMA or like the Democratic National Convention, or the Kamala on election night, which I just did for the New Yorker this year, because these are situations that are highly produced. It's like a sort of like visual smorgasbord, where actually I feel like then what I get to do is engage the part of my brain that's just like, I'm looking at something that really wants to be presented in a certain way. How can I photograph this and like get underneath of it? Like, how can I capture the vibe? How can I show you the more than meets the eye of what's going on here, using what I'm interested in aesthetically, and like zooming in on what really attracts me, or, pulling back to odd moments, or like really using light and color almost as like a sort of like synesthesia technique to make you hear something. And so that, I love getting to do that, but it's very situational depending on what you're working with and how delicate it is.
Yeah, fantastic. Look, we're coming to the end of our conversation. Before I kind of thank you again for spending your evening with me, what there's so many other things that you do that we haven't really talked about in terms of your different art, your mentoring, speaking engagements. Is there anything else that you feel like we haven't covered that you think would be important to address now? Is there anything you want to kind of share with the audience?
Oh my God, I've yapped so much tonight. I don't even know.
It's been
uh,
fantastic.
no, I really thank you for the great questions and having me on. I think if I forgot to say anything at this point, that's on me. I think
What's next? Obviously, you're working on the documentary. What else are you doing in and around that we can watch out for?
yeah, I mean, I'm working on getting back to Ukraine to continue the projects. That's front of mind. Doing some workshop teaching with my co-conspirator Daniela Zaltzman. We've been running a workshop series called the NBA. So if you are interested in hearing me yap some more along with my dear friend Daniela, who taught me everything I know.
I'd love to have her on. Where is that workshop?
That's in New Orleans every year. And then we frequently, we've both been really crazy busy recently. So like it's been a little less frequently, but we do occasional Zoom workshops, like weekend intensives, which are cool. And you should absolutely have Daniela on because she's the greatest and also really, really funny, which that's what people don't know about her. She's the funniest person I know. So yeah. And I'm also like working on a couple commercial projects around New York, which I also really like doing, and it's sort of a nice break. I'm gearing up to try to shoot some fashion week stuff for, I feel like people always think that like I only want to shoot bad news, and I also really like shooting like pretty shiny stuff and like parties and stuff like that.
Yeah, I can only apologize to you and the audience for, I guess, drilling down a little bit more on the bigger topics. But we'll save that for part 2, I guess. But yeah, next time I'm in the city, I'll send you a message, and hopefully you're there. We can grab a coffee. Yeah. In the meantime, we will link everything that we've referred to or talked about, especially your website and your email for people who might want to support the documentary. I wish you the best of luck. Extremely inspiring. Love your work. Keep going. Keep up the good fight. And until next time, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and really thank you for the great questions. It was awesome talking to you.
Appreciate it.
I thought your questions were absolutely lovely. I really
Okay.
appreciate, sometimes you get on these things and somebody's like, who the fuck are you? So
Yeah.
I really appreciate that you like, you seem to have checked out the work and everything.
Yeah.
It was
Big
great
fan.
talking. And thank you
Yeah.
to Fee in the background for your help and support.
She'll be
Um,
seeing your face a lot over the next few weeks in the edit.
cool.
So